an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Shadow and Bone Trilogy, Book 3, Ruin and Rising, Chapters 15 and 16. In these chapters, Alina finds out what happened in Karimzin and pretty much has a meltdown. But I really thought we had done this already. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Joanna for commissioning this episode. So, I wasn't sure, again, the way that these books are marked as Kindle books is really difficult for me to tell when I have read far enough. I asked in the Spoil Me group, but I think that nobody got to see it in time, how far I should read, and I just decided to do the next 2 chapters, because there are 4 chapters remaining, and I wasn't sure if they were like the same length as one another, but I decided to err on the side of caution. Otherwise, I was going to be covering all 4 chapters in one episode, and that felt like it might be too much. So hopefully y'all are okay with this, and it was the right call. If not, I'm sorry. But I do want to mention in this episode also that beyond this book, there have been several bookings made for the next book, which is King of Scars. So if anybody was wondering if I was going to be continuing with Leigh Bardugo, I will be. I didn't even know at the time that there was another book. I knew that she had written others. I didn't realize that they were set in the same universe. So when I saw that there were more bookings than we needed to finish out Ruin and Rising, I was like, what happened? Everybody was keeping like careful attention, I thought. And then they were like, no, we're just starting the next book. And King of Scars, if I'm not mistaken, did that come out after the Six of Crows duology? I am not totally sure on the timing. But anyway, so the reason I'm asking about the timing of King of Scars is because I am hoping it came out after the duology, because it seems like it has taken a minute for Leigh Bardugo to get her stride as a writer. These 2 chapters, guys, were really, really boring for me. I mean, I do not understand what is taking so long to get to the point. We know that there has to be a final showdown between Alina and the Darkling. We know what the Darkling is capable of. And these chapters, it feels like, are a waste. We get a final moment of, oh, he's really just willing to do whatever it takes and kill whomever. I thought we knew this. And there's just this whole, it feels so repetitive. And I'm just very curious about anybody else who is listening who read these for the first time, what your feelings were on this. Because I feel like if I were reading these on my own, it would be one thing because I'm able to just speed through it. And so maybe it wouldn't sink in quite so much how many times we repeat the same motifs and the same kinds of conversations and the same inner turmoil and back and forth that Alina has. But when you're covering it the way that I am, I think it really makes it stand out just how plodding and repetitive it has gotten. And I confess that when I was trying to figure out if I should just do 2 chapters instead of 4, I went to the Amazon listing for this book. And I didn't read any reviews or anything because I was afraid there would be spoilers in them. But I was trying to see how many pages the book was to try and gauge, and a bunch of the like reviews at the top were like 2 and 3 stars. Most people did not like this one and felt like from the titles of the reviews, people seemed to be like, what are you doing? So at least I feel a little bit reassured that it's not just me, because I've had that experience where I really hated something and I go to the reviews expecting to see that everybody agreed with me and then find out I'm in the minority by far. That happened with A Discovery of Witches, which is one of the biggest wastes of time of any book I have ever read. I will just say that. And I went, and apparently people liked it, and I still don't know why, but they did. So that one always stands out in my mind as like, oh, okay. Normally I consider myself to have my finger on the pulse, but not that time. But, y'all, so the last chapter is the one where we find out that Mal is the amplifier. And I'll tell you what, I think my main issue with these chapters, even more than the repetitiveness of things, I am baffled at the fact that Mal being the amplifier doesn't really get dealt with in any way, like in terms of, for example, I was saying how perhaps you don't have to kill him and you can just take some of his bones and you don't have to take his life. Have we considered that? And nobody even presents that as an option, or it tries to talk about experimenting with doing something else. And, or maybe just him, you know, wrapping his hand around her hand or his hand around her wrist being the thing. And I really thought it was sort of weird that we end the last chapter with this massive revelation, and we don't ever even see Alina tell everybody else the news. Did that not seem weird to any of you? We start this chapter, and granted, the whole thing with the Darkling marched on Karimzin overshadows everything, but I sort of thought once we had like gotten past that piece of news and the grief from it, that we would then have Alina being like, all right, guys, I have something to tell you. And we would get everybody's reaction on it. But we don't. And I was really disappointed. I wanted to see what everybody's suggestions or even just their reactions were. Like, even if they don't have a suggestion, I want to know how this would affect the dynamic between everybody. And even David, who's like the experimenter, doesn't come up. Like, there's a moment where Genya says to Alina, maybe it doesn't have to go that way. And I thought for sure we were going to get a suggestion. We could do it, you know, maybe we could just like cut one of his fingers off and that would be enough. No. We don't even get a suggestion of anything regarding Mal. It's just doing something that's a total alternative to using Mal as an amplifier entirely. I was just so baffled. It just feels like everything has been moving so unnaturally. The plot is not being carried by people's actions or by rational thought. It's being carried by whatever has been decided has to happen next. And it's just frustrating because nobody is discussing anything with each other or sitting down to have the kinds of like discussions I would expect about their situation. And I am not getting to see some of the more important ones. I just really can't believe that we don't see Alina telling everybody about Mal. That feels like a major thing that just gets completely left out. I don't understand it. So, chapter 15, Alina has just gotten the news about Karimzin. And she asks for Tamar's key. And goes up to this room to be by herself so that she can get in contact with the Darkling. Guys, remind me, because it's been 3 months since the last episode. How do they know, other than Mal? I know Mal knows that she can get in contact with the Darkling. Do the rest of them know? Are they aware why she's asking for Tamar's key? because I was assuming they didn't know, and I thought this would probably seem really odd to them if they... I guess they would just assume she wants to be by herself. But I couldn't remember if they were aware of the fact that she can do this. I have to assume they know. So I gripped the sill, vaguely registering the rickety house at the edge of the settlement, the spindles in the distance, the mountains beyond. I felt the pull of the wound in my shoulder. I launched myself across the tether, seeking him, the only thought in my mind, what have you done? At last, the Darkling said. He turned to me, his beautiful face coming into focus. He was leaning against a scorched mantle. Its outline was sickeningly familiar. And he says, "Come, I want you to see." I was trembling, but I let him take my hand and place it in the crook of his arm. Bitch, listen. What the fuck? Alina, truly, I really want to know what the fuck. You know, I just have to put this down to bad writing. We have to feel like there is some kind of bond between her and the Darkling that nobody else can possibly understand in order to justify her being willing to even have a conversation with this guy again. But it's not believable. You know, she has this whole conversation in the last chapter, I think it's the last one, where she's talking to Mal about how he doesn't understand how alike she and the Darkling are. And he's like, do you really think the Darkling would have forgiven Genya? And, and it's like Mal's arguments are so rock solid, in my opinion, that her continued belief that she and the Darkling really have something in common makes no sense. And thus, the alleged bond between them, where she, feels something toward him, it's just nonsense. He leads her through this house as she sees the wreckage all around her. And he says, "I've been here for days waiting for you." The stone steps that led to the front door were smeared with ash, but intact. And he shows her the tree that she had climbed as a little girl. Now its branches were full of bodies. The 3 Grisha instructors hung from the same thick limb, their kefta fluttering slightly in the wind, purple, red, and blue. Beside them, Botkin's face was nearly black above the rope that had dug into his neck. He was covered in wounds. Next to him, Anakuya swayed in her black dress, her heavy key ring at her waist. She was, I think, the closest thing you had to a mother, murmured the Darkling. Which just, it just feels so unnatural. Who says that? Who points out in the moment, I am pretty certain this person was a mother figure to you, if I'm not mistaken. It's just, it rings so false, and it's just so melodramatic in a way that takes me completely out of the moment and makes me almost want to laugh, and he says, because she asks, don't you feel any of it? And he says, my tears are long since spent. If I still felt as you do, if I ached as you do, I could not have borne this eternity. And she asks, where are the students? What have you done? And he tells her that they are on her skiff as hostages. And she believes him, which I just don't get why. It's like, yeah, you're not seeing their bodies here. And I am certain that it's better to operate under the assumption that he does have hostages at all. But also, this is a dude who has consistently done whatever the fuck he feels like and does not seem to feel any obligation to you in any way at all. So why do you think that he would uphold his end of any deal? There's just nothing about this that, like, she has no reason to think he's going to do anything to ensure leverage that he has to uphold his end on, because he has all of it, all of the leverage. And then he tells her, I'll have this power, whatever the cost. Again, very melodramatic. He ends it with, I will strip away all that you know, all that you love, until you have no shelter but me. In grief, in horror, I let myself break apart. And it completely failed to land. Y'all, we knew this. Am I wrong? We knew this about him already. We have seen him be incredibly ruthless. We have seen the way that he has targeted people that she cares about specifically. Why is this a shock that he would do something like this? He killed his own fucking mother, dude. Like, what more did you need to know? It just makes no sense to me that it's been kept to the end of the book because it's supposed to be the most high impact of his atrocities. But because he has been incredibly upfront with how despicable he is throughout the series, it doesn't make sense that we have waited this long for it, or that we needed it at this point. It's sort of like in Game of Thrones, there's this character who was like, he was a real piece of shit and beat Sansa and was instrumental in like beheading Ned Stark and the whole thing. And in the show, they decide to add on top of everything that he has done that he is a pedophile to really make us hate him. And it was just so unnecessary. We hated him already. There was no reason to add pedophilia to the story because we already wanted this guy dead multiple times. And yet they added this extra thing just because. And it was just, and that's kind of how I feel here. The Darkling is so... There's nothing... If you were going to do this, you want that character, the Darkling, to genuinely feel a little conflicted. You want to do a Kylo Ren thing. And give the illusion that maybe he does have a conscience. Maybe he wants to be convinced to change his ways. Maybe he's actually rethinking all of his choices. There's a sliver of hope, a reason for her to consistently put herself out there. And then he does something like this, and she realizes that she has been wrong all along, Okay, then this works. But we have had him be an utter piece of shit forever. So what about this is moving things forward? What about this is changing the way we feel about him, or upping the stakes even? Because it's like he's got some hostages that are students. Okay. But like literally there's almost everybody is dead, and that feels like the weakest possible bit to fight for at this point. It doesn't even feel real because we don't see that he even has them. So in my mind, he doesn't. And there's no reason to think that he's not lying because he knows that he can fucking play her because she'll do anything. Even in this moment, he's telling her, until you have no shelter but me, as he folds her into his arms and kisses the top of her hair. Bitch, what are you doing? Why are you letting him even fucking touch you? The instant that you see this, back the fuck out of there and get into your room. You're letting him embrace you and kiss your head. I understand that it's meant to be like kind of twisted, but it only works if we at all understand why she's allowing this. And he has been such a shit the whole time that it completely fails me. it just consistently, guys, I just don't get it. I feel like I'm sorry. I feel like the last few episodes covering this book have just been me being incredibly angry, but I can't pretend to think anything else. It's weak. And what kills me is that there is some potential here, but it's so poorly developed, and it really feels like this book and the last book could have been one book. This should have been a duology. It could even have maybe been one book. But I'll be generous and let her have two. It absolutely does not work as 3 books. It's way too drawn out. There's not enough nuance to any of these characters to warrant 3 books. And there's not enough growth to any of these characters. Everybody feels like the same person they were when they started. Even Alina, considering that she has this like awesome power and all of this responsibility weighing on her shoulders, she does not feel like she has grown as a person very much. She's still having the same fucking arguments with herself that she was having at the end of book 1, you know? Like, it just doesn't feel like anybody has moved forward in a significant way that changes the way they behave. Anything that we hear about the like changes, even in Alina, it's just like her thoughts change a little, in terms of like maybe being willing to do something more ruthless or maybe but she never acts on any of it. So it doesn't change her substantially enough for me to be concerned that she's going to the dark side, has the potential to do it, or wants to do it, really. You know? I don't. So she just is on the floor of the room that she had like used to contact him from. And she is just curled up there crying. I just felt gentle hands take hold of me. Zoya sat me down on the edge of the bed and Tamar settled beside me. Nadia took a comb to my hair, carefully working through the tangles. Genya washed first my face, then my hands. We sat there saying nothing, all of them clustered around me. He has the students, I said flatly. 23 children. He killed the teachers. Excuse me. He told us, said Nadia softly. I think some part of me expected blame, recrimination. Instead, Genya rested her head on my shoulder. Tamar squeezed my hand. This wasn't just comfort, I realized. They were leaning on me, as I was leaning on them for strength. Had the Darkling had friends like this? People whom he loved, who had fought for him and cared for him and made him laugh? People who had become little more than sacrifices to a dream that outlived them? Now see, that's the kind of thing that it would have been nice to know. It would have been interesting to see that develop. But instead we drop in on this guy who is already evil, and it does not feel like there's any forward movement from there. He's just what he is and he will be, and that's that. Baghra was like an attempt at showing what he had been, but first of all, she's his mother, so it rings a little different. And secondly, hearing secondhand is no substitute. It's just not. It doesn't work. You need to see it. And if we had that, if we heard even from other people about, you know, some of the sacrifices that the Darkling had made or people that he had killed, maybe what could work, a Darkling POV chapter or 2 or 3, where we are in his head and he is thinking about the things that he has done or had to do. And you don't necessarily need to present it in a light that for us is actually ambiguous. It could be, oh no, that shit is just genuinely like hateful and evil. But he might be feeling conflicted about it. He may think that maybe it was justified. That's what's important, is like understanding anything about where he's coming from and why Alina is drawn to him or willing to hear him out at all. So this is where Mal says something about how why won't you let me, you were willing to give up your life, why won't you let me do the same? Because I can't bear it. You will bear it, or all of these deaths, all we've given up, will be for nothing. Genya cleared her throat. The thing is, you may not have to. David has an idea. Oh, you guys, I cannot tell you how disappointed I was. I thought for sure David has an idea about maybe not having to kill Mal, but still using Mal. But no. It turns out that they are thinking maybe you can bend light and make the whole army invisible. Spoilers, the army turns out to be incredibly small. So probably this will be easier than she thought. But the whole thing about masking actual people who are moving around is that, first of all, they're not just in the sky. They're on the ground casting shadows. They're moving things, like they wind up having to do some work on sound and figuring out how to keep the noise of them moving around sort of not even like covering the sound, but making it sound as if it's coming from different places than it is, so as to just kind of confuse the issue. And let's see. He'll have a Prichniki, I think that's how you say that, and Grisha too. They won't be short on ammunition like we will. Even if they can't see their targets, they may just open fire and hope they get lucky. So we stay out of range. Tamar moved her plate to the center of the table. This is the glass skiff, she said. We place marksmen around the perimeter and use them to thin the Darkling's ranks. Then we get close enough to sneak onto the skiff, and once we get the kids to safety, we blow it to bits, said Harshaw. I was a little bit confused about this. We stay out of range, but then we get close enough to sneak onto the skiff. I don't see how that changes what Tolia said about how they're going to have a lot of ammunition and maybe open fire. Or maybe she's saying, like, if we lure them out, then they will be too afraid of hitting their own people, and so they won't just open fire? I just didn't really understand the method here. Let's see. What if I came at him unseen using light for cover the way others use darkness? It was sneaky, even cowardly. But the Darkling and I had left honor behind long ago. Cowardly? In what fucking universe? You're putting yourself into a position where you could die. That's the opposite of... What are you talking about? He'd been in my head, waged war on my heart. Ugh! I wasn't interested in a fair fight, not if there was a chance I could save Mal's life. I am so over this fucking love triangle. Who cares? We know you're ending up with Mal. We know it. It's fine. At this point, there's no fucking other option. Even if you did save Nikolai, of course you're going to wind up with Mal, because for some reason, he's supposed to be the one, even though there is nothing appealing about this guy. He sucks. But sure, you're going to wind up with him because, let's be honest, Alina, you also suck. So, I guess you are made for each other. Congratulations. Boring asses. So, at this point, Nadia says, at least consider the plan. And if all goes wrong, Alina gets a new bracelet, finished Zoya. I scowled. How about I slice you open and see how your bones fit? Zoya fluffed her hair. I bet they're just as gorgeous as the rest of me. I really do enjoy Zoya a lot. Zoya and Nikolai are like the two best characters in these books. And Bagra, before she died. Bagra was badass. So let's see. It will take more than an explosion to kill the Darkling. He survived the fold and the destruction of the chapel. It has to be me. If we can separate him from his shadow soldiers, I can use the cut. The Darkling was powerful, but I doubted even he could bounce back from being torn in half. And though I had no claim to Morozsova's name, I was the Sun Summoner. I'd hoped for a grand destiny, but I would settle for a clean kill. Why is that not a grand destiny? That's still, like, you're killing the Darkling who's been alive for like 1,000 years at this point. Like, that still seems grand to me, but that's fine. So at this point, Mal makes them all promise. He says, all right, but if it does go wrong, we all agree what has to happen. And he asks her to promise, and she says, I'll do it. She doesn't say, I promise I'll do it. She just says, I'll do it, which I think is kind of wriggling out of it, but it's fine. So at this point, they go into the sort of like routine that happens when you are like feeling kind of hopped up on adrenaline, but you can't do anything at the moment. And he tells her that he wants her to dance with him. I tucked my head against Mal's shoulder and breathed in his scent. I knew I shouldn't let myself believe in this possibility. We didn't have an army. We didn't have the resources of a king. We only had this ragged crew. I knew that Darkling would use these people against me if he could, but it had never occurred to him that they might be more than liabilities. Maybe he'd underestimated them. Maybe he'd underestimated me too. It was stupid. It was dangerous. But Anakuya used to tell me that hope was tricky like water. Somehow it always found a way in. I did like that quote. So, we left early the next morning and passed back through Dva Stolba to retrieve the bittern from the quarry. And they climb in, and she is thinking about, because Audric, reminder, he lost his arm, and he sees the blood stain, and it's just like, good God, is all of that my blood? And I was just like, wow, yeah, that must be pretty weird to see, like, after the fact, when you don't remember much about how it all, I mean, I would be very distracted, just saying, if I lost my arm. The journey took only a few hours, and we landed in a marshy pasture west of Karevia. The town was the size of the site of the summer horse sales every year. It wasn't known for anything but its racing track and its breeding stables, and even without the war, this late in the year, it would have been all but deserted. So, reminder, the last chapter before this one starts off, or maybe the one before, she tries to send word to the apparat to send her reinforcements, and this is supposed to be where she is going to meet them. And she says, I didn't think the apparat would turn us over to the Darkling, but there was the possibility that he'd struck some kind of new bargain with the Shu Han or Fjerda. And it just, again, bugs me so much that she left the apparat in charge. I just so deeply disagree with... I get why she kept him alive, but she didn't leave anybody sort of keeping him in line. And I understand wanting all of the strongest, Grisha soldiers with you, but when very few people wind up turning up, it makes sense because this guy, he clearly doesn't really respect or fear her. He respects and fears what she commands in everyone else. But I think he also has called her bluff and knows where she draws the line, and that she's not like... What I'm saying is I want, by the end of this book, for him to be dead by her hand, and I don't think that's ever happening. But I really think he deserves it, and I would be fine with it. So this is when she practices making Misha invisible in this field. And she's able to do it immediately, but when he waves his arms, when he starts running around, that is when it begins to waver. And you can see his arms like flapping. You can see the air around him sort of like the light wobbling. And from the side, they can see him at times. Like she's able to shield him from the front. But if they see him from a different angle, then he appears again. I spent the rest of the afternoon vanishing 1, then 2, then 5 Grisha at a time in the field. It was a different kind of work, but Bagra's lessons still applied. If I concentrated too hard on projecting my power, variables overwhelmed me. But if I thought about the light being everywhere, if I didn't try to prod it and just let it bend, it got much easier. I thought of the times I'd seen the Darkling use his power to blind soldiers in a battle, taking on multiple enemies at once. It was easy for him, natural. And she thinks about him saying to her, "I know things about power that you can barely guess at." I practiced that night, then started up again the next morning after Tamar and Harshaw set out, but my concentration kept faltering. With more marksmen, our attack on the Darkling's skiff might actually stand a chance. What would be waiting at the racecourse? The priest himself? No one at all? I imagined a surf army protected by 3 amplifiers marching beneath the banner of a firebird. That wasn't the war we were waging anymore. So, this is like the moment when he says to her, "I know things about power that you can only guess at." I realized that for me really sums up my frustration with the book, is that he shouldn't be saying, "I know shit you can only guess at," 3 chapters from the end of a trilogy of books. If that is being said, it should be towards the beginning of book 2. And she figures out the truth about the cost of power at the end of book 2. And book 3 is her taking the mantle on for realsies and not being wishy-washy anymore. But this quote being what's ringing in her mind this late in the game, I do not feel that you can suddenly power her up another notch and somehow bring her to the next level in the next 2 chapters and it not feel very cheap to me. Because I feel like that's going to have to happen. There's no way that you keep this going with the power that she has shown us so far up against the Darkling, and she wins. She has to find a new level, and there is such a trope of, "Oh, I've been trying to reach the next level, but I wasn't able to do it until my life was in danger, or the life of a loved one was in danger, and suddenly when I was faced with this incredible insurmountable obstacle that meant life or death, I was pushed that extra bit and now I get it and I can do it." That trope has been done in these books already. I do not want that to be how it finishes out. I want her to have control by now. I don't want there to be anything and it feels like a really artificial way to build tension, because we have no doubt she's winning this. We don't the Darkling is not still alive in later books. She will win. So if she doesn't have that ability now, it feels like we just know it will happen at some point. I want to go into a battle feeling like she has leveled up and feeling pretty confident. And then you show us that he can do something extra that we still didn't know about. And that would be I was feeling very confident. And now we've got a new fucking curveball in here. And now it turns into a difference between just, I have to accelerate my power to meet his power. Then it can become something that feels a lot more tactical. Maybe we could do something, and I think that's what she's attempting to do here. Tactical with the glass skiff and them approaching and her shielding them. And I think what she's trying to do is she has allies and friends who are willing to put themselves on the line, which he does not have. And he doesn't appreciate how important it is to have people who work with you instead of being by yourself, relying on your own power. I get that that's what she's attempting to do here, but it just doesn't feel, it doesn't hit. It just doesn't. So let's see. Genya and David are working on building like the basically little bombs that they will use in case something were to happen to Alina and they need to get back through the fold and have the light. And she is talking to Tolia, and he says something about how even if she defeats the Darkling, the fold will still be there. And she says, I can deal with the fold. My power will make crossings possible. We can eliminate the Volcra. And this is one of those things that it's, again, meant to sort of insert a sliver of doubt. But I am certain that she solves that. That, like, killing the Darkling kills the fold, or whatever she does powers her up to such a degree that she kills the Darkling and the fold at the same time. We see this thing where she runs into Nikolai later, and he tries to get her to use her ability on him to transform him back. And it starts to work, and then the darkness in him fights back. But it's just, of course, she just didn't have that extra whatever. And she's going to get it, and then she'll be able to fix him. I have no doubt. And I just wish that there was some doubt about any of it. I don't know if that's just part of the disadvantage of reading these after you've read the next couple books, but it just seems like I don't need it to be an unhappy ending. I am fine with everything being solved and her managing to, but it just feels so predictable in the way that we're going to get there. And I wish that I felt like she was going to really surprise me, but I don't see how there's time for that now. We only got 2 chapters after this section, you know? Those are the last 2. We'll see. And let's see. I didn't know if our plan would work, and if it did, there were still too many unknowns. If we bested the Darkling, what would become of his shadow soldiers? And what about Nikolai? What if killing the Darkling caused his death? Should we be trying to capture the Darkling instead? If we survived, Mal would have to go into hiding. His life would be forfeit if anyone learned what he was. And I don't know, maybe Mal will wind up being the thing. Maybe I will have been so wrong about how all of this goes down. And I really hope I am, honestly. I really do. So this is when they come upon the soldiers. There are only 12 of them. And they all have the sun tattooed on their faces. And when they come upon her, they get off their horses and all drop down into a kneel. And Zoya says, ugh, this again. And I loved that reaction so much. It's exactly also how Alina happens to feel. But I just enjoy that Zoya actually says it. Is this all of you? He nodded. And what excuse does the apparat send? He swallowed. None. The pilgrims say daily prayer for your safety and for the destruction of the fold. He claims that your last command was for him to watch over your flock. And she says, and my plea for aid? Ruby shook her head. The only reason we knew that you and Nikolai Lantsov had requested help was because a monk loyal to you retrieved the message from the Church of Sankt Lukin. I don't remember what the deal is with the church or how that person had but yeah, you know, the apparat not handling her messages, not telling people the truth. Of course he isn't. Of course he isn't. I wish there was a way to enchant him and just make him do shit and be like her little puppet that she can just be like, hey guys, it's me, what's up? Through him. That would be amazing. So yeah, he looks at Ruby, Vladim, and then just says, we escaped. I'd known the apparat wasn't to be trusted, and yet some part of me had hoped he might offer me more than prayers. But I'd told him to tend to my followers, to keep them from harm, and they were certainly safer in the White Cathedral than marching into the fold. The apparat would do what he did best. Wait. When the dust cleared, either I would have defeated the Darkling or found my martyrdom. Either way, men would still take up arms in my name. The apparat's empire of the faithful would rise. So they then go into the fold to travel. And she has to like circle back in order to pick up the second group because the bittern, I think, doesn't hold everybody. And I was sort of worried that there was going to be some drama, but they are actually able to cross the fold pretty easily. Like, it's not that there isn't a Volcra attack, but she's able to hold them back with no trouble here at all. And eventually they come across this house on an apple farm, which sounded like such a little bit of heaven, honestly. It's peak autumn. She says the orchards were thick with fruit that would never be harvested. And I was just like, oh, that sounds amazing. The owner's house was a lavish, perfect little cake of a building, lovingly maintained and topped with a white cupola. I felt almost guilty as Harshaw broke a window and climbed inside to unlock the doors. And everybody comments on how incredibly tacky the house is, which I did find really funny. There's tons of figurines. One would imagine lots of doilies and a bunch of floral embroidered cushions and, things like this. So there isn't any food, though. It looks like the food has all been taken. I was surprised that none of the figurines and things like that were looted. If people took food, I would think that they would take other stuff that they could sell for food. But I don't know, maybe they just didn't have a means to transport it without it all breaking, because it does sound pretty delicate. We'd planned to reunite with the sold-out soul at the monument to Sancta Anastasia that stood on a low hill overlooking what had once been Semna. Semna had survived the wasting plague that had claimed half the population of the surrounding villages, but Semna had not survived the fold. It had been swallowed up when the Black Heretics' disastrous experiments first created the Unsea. So they make camp at the foot of this huge statue, and she walked down the hill to the edge of the black shore, and this is when she hears a noise and turns around, and there is Nikolai. And he is able to retain enough of his, mind, really, to communicate with her pretty effectively. So she takes out the emerald ring that had been her mother's. He frowned, a line appearing between his brows, then folded his wings and leapt soundlessly from the rock. And he holds the ring in his claw and slides it onto her finger. So she realizes that he absolutely knows who she is and that he is approaching her like this because he knows. And then he makes a gesture like the one she makes when she's summoning. And when she summons, he takes her hand and presses it against his chest. I don't know what my power will do to you, I protested. The corner of his mouth curled, the faintest suggestion of Nikolai's wry smile. I could almost hear him say, "Really, lovely, what could be worse?" Beneath my hand, his heart beat, steady and human. I released a long breath. "All right," I said, "I'll try." I summoned the barest bit of light, letting it flow through my palm. He winced, but held my hand firmly in place. I pushed a little harder, trying to direct the light into him, thinking of the spaces between, letting it seep through his skin. The black cracks on his torso began to recede. I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. Could it possibly be this simple? "It's working," I gasped. He grimaced, but waved me on, asking for more. I called the light into him, watching the black veins fade and recoil. He was panting now, his eyes closed. A low, pained whine rose from his throat. His grip around my wrist was iron. Then I felt something push back as if the darkness within him was fighting. It shoved against the light. All at once the cracks exploded outward, just as dark as before, like the roots of a tree drinking deep of poisoned water. Nikolai flinched and shoved away from me with a frustrated snarl. And I think that either she isn't pushing as hard as she needs to, or she's trying to shove light into him instead of pulling the darkness that's like hidden by, or pulling the light that's in him that's hidden by the darkness. Like maybe she's trying too hard to override something instead of trying to give him back something, if that makes sense. But I don't know how conceptual this magic is. It's hard to tell. And at this point, Nikolai, he has a really bad reaction to the snapback of the darkness. And he turns on her and tries to sort of attack her. There's a moment in which she just seems really devastated and deflated. And he, because of how saddened he seems, it sort of lures her into touching him. He dropped his forehead to my shoulder. He released a small, shuddering sigh. Then he inhaled and tensed. He turned his head. I felt his breath on my neck, the scrape of one of his teeth beneath my jaw. No. So she tells him to stop and summons the beginnings of the cut. And she sees the moment where he realizes what he was going to do. And it almost looks like his eyes fill with tears, although she's not sure if that's what it actually is that's happening. And he flies into the fold. And later on, she says like that she screamed Nikolai after him, which I understand screaming at him because you don't want him to go, but there was something of the urgency about that I was like, what is she worried is going to happen? And later on, when she tells Mal about the fact that he flew into the fold, Mal says, do you think he meant to, and she says, kill himself? I don't know. Maybe it's like a vacation home to him now. It didn't even occur to me that the fold would hurt him. Why would it? It's full of Volcra. Is he like a different type of Volcra than the others that she's seen? Or why is that even a consideration? It was just weird to me that they're like not seeing him as one of, like, I understand that you don't want to, but you also know the reality of the situation. But yeah, I don't know. They're both like very worried about this. And I think that maybe something about the Volcra will be what helps her defeat the Darkling. I'm also just kind of surprised at the fact that she isn't able to call any creatures of light. You know, we have the Darkling able to summon the Nichevoya, and I would think that there would be something of the opposite to counter that. And maybe that's what it's going to be that she's able to do. Or maybe she'll able to like instill some of her ability into her friends somehow. But yeah, I just am surprised that really the one forward movement with her power in that regard is that she is able to summon shadows, because we saw her manage that at the beginning of this book. I don't know if she's able to wrest his control away from him and take over both the Nichevoya and use her light, or could she turn the Nichevoya into something else? But the fact that she hasn't got any beings has had my attention for a while now. I sort of expected it to even out, I suppose, before this. So I did like this conversation. He tried to have me heal him. It didn't work. You don't know what you may be able to do once the amplifiers are brought together. You mean after I murder you? Alina, we are not talking about this. You can't just pull the covers over your head and pretend this isn't happening. Can and will. You're being a brat, and you're being noble and self-sacrificing, and it makes me want to throttle you. Well, that's a start. That's not funny. How am I supposed to deal with this? He asked. I don't feel noble or self-sacrificing. And he then says, I'm just... What? He threw up his hands. Hungry. You're hungry? Yes, he snapped. I'm hungry, and I'm tired, and I'm pretty sure that Toya is going to eat all the grouse. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. Zoya warned me about this. She gets cranky when she's hungry, too. I'm not cranky. Sulky, I amended graciously. I'm not sulking. You're right, I said, trying to restrain my giggles. Definitely more of a pout than a sulk. And I actually really liked this interaction. It's like more things like this that I would enjoy between the two of them. And it never feels that authentic. This was one of the better ones, I really think. Just the fact that he admits in the middle of this argument about something that's very real. It's not even like they're arguing about something petty and small, and he suddenly realizes I'm being a dick because I'm hungry. It's much funnier that they're having an argument about something that's life and death, and then he admits, well, I am also very hungry. For some reason, that really got to me. So the next section is they, let's see, get to the house with the soul. And the house, while they have been gone, has been sort of like taken apart and made into sort of a cross between like a barracks and a munitions factory. The kitchen looked like a storm had blown through. Bubbling pots covered the cook stove. A huge kettle had been brought in from the cider press to serve as a cooling tub. David perched on a stool at the big wooden table where the servants had probably rolled dough only 2 weeks before. Now it was littered with glass and metal, smears of some tar-like substance, and countless little bottles of foul-smelling yellow sludge. "Is this entirely safe?" I asked him. "Nothing is entirely safe." How reassuring. And they have like taken all of the stuff from the thing they're working on now is saddles, and they're pulling apart all of the saddles and like sectioning out the pieces of leather and the bits of like grommet and screws and things into different sections. I'm not sure what they're planning on doing with that. Like if it's just for putting together whatever it is going to be used for the light and the sort of bombs later. But they all sit down to dinner, and it's sort of like one of probably the final communal moments that we'll have where everybody is together and they are able to let their guard down just a little bit. They probably shouldn't, but it's the night before when everybody is thinking, I may not be alive tomorrow, or by the end of the week, who knows? And that is a lot of what it feels like is motivating her and Mal. So I should mention too that they have given Misha a sleeping potion, the little boy, in an effort to keep him from trying to come with them when they take off in the morning. So she and Mal have a conversation that was sort of reminding me of like Bella and Jacob, because she asks whether or not the amplifier is the thing that sort of drew her and Mal together. She feels like perhaps it's not even about us. And he takes her hand and pulls her into this really pretty sounding like conservatory. The rain beat a steady rhythm against the vaulted roof and glazed glass walls. Mal moved deeper into the room, lighting lanterns that rested on the edge of a slender reflecting pool. Apple trees lined the walls, their boughs dense with clusters of white flowers. Their petals lay like a smattering of snow on the red tile floor and floated on the surface of the water. It sounds really, really pretty. And there's a desk tucked into the corner. A shawl had been thrown over the back. There was a basket of sewing things resting on a rug patterned with apple blossoms. The lady of the house must have come here to do her needlework, to sip her morning tea. In the daytime, she would have had a perfect view of the orchards through the big arched windows. A book was open on the desk. So this is just a really, pretty scene, and it sort of makes her and Mal talk about the way their lives could have been if things had gone a different way. And she thinks about how if her ability had manifested itself when she was a child, if she hadn't, sort of inadvertently dampened it, she would have been taken to the little palace and would have turned out to be a very different person with a sense of herself that's perhaps a little arrogant and she says the Darkling would have sought Moritsova's amplifiers fruitlessly, hopelessly, until one day a tracker traveled into the ice of Tsipeya. And she says this orphan would be the first to spot the stag after centuries of searching. So, of course, the Darkling and I would have to travel to Tsipeya in his great black coach. In the snow? His great black sleigh, I amended. Which was interesting. I found it surprising that she thought the Darkling would ever even hear about the fact that Mal had, like, you know, because Mal was brought into his circle, his orbit, really, due to her. So I guess he's just trusting on, like, Moritsova's stag is a legend, and if somebody says that they saw something legendary, he would figure it out and zero in on it. Probably she's right, like, eventually it would have gotten back to him. But I did think that this was interesting to think about. I appreciated just sort of reflecting on how different everything could have wound up. And she asks Mal whether or not he noticed her at Karemzin, which it doesn't sound like he did from the way she talks about him. But here he says that he absolutely did, but he felt really bad about it because she was supposed to just be his friend. And this is when, let's see, I would have been different too without you. Weaker, reckless, afraid of the dark. But no matter who or what I was, I would have been yours. And he's saying, I'm going to miss this. And he's just talking about all of these things about her. And at first I was like, is he just assuming that she's going to kill him? And then I realized, like, well, part of the deal is if they win, she would marry Nikolai. So it sounds like he's assuming that's still going to happen somehow, that she would wind up. But I don't know. At this point, Nikolai is gone. So I guess he is just assuming she's going to kill him. Yeah, I guess so. And at this point, basically, he's like, I really was hoping that we'd be able to, like, get married. And when he said this, because I had asked you guys before, have they had sex or not? Because I had assumed for sure that they were. But the way this is talked about, I guess not. This still would have been our end. Even in dreams, we had no future. I wanted more for you, he said, a white veil in your hair, vows we could keep. He drew back, searching my eyes. And I guess that, yeah, they have never had sex before. Because she's so self-conscious when he takes her clothes off. And she wouldn't feel that way if she had been naked with him before. This is clearly like a first impressions feeling. So, yeah, they have sex. And that is the end of the chapter. Is just her being like, well, I guess that's what we get. And I don't think that's what they get. I think that she winds up with him no matter how other things turn out. Whether she is able to, like, save Nikolai or not, I really think that she's not winding up with Nikolai no matter what. They just can't do it. There's no way. So we'll see. We'll see if I'm right. All right, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you, Joanna, for commissioning this episode. I know it sounds like I don't mean that because I was really angry, but I am grateful because I understand that it's probably frustrating if you guys don't really like this book either to have to, like, finish out the commission just to get to the one that you are actually interested in hearing about. So apologies, but what can you do? That's what happens with sort of inconsistent properties, I guess. But I appreciate you, and, you know, I am very much interested in how this ends because I'm just hoping that I am wrong and that she surprises me and does a whole other thing. So we'll see. I'm gonna keep my hopes, like, slightly up. It, you know, hope is like that. It gets in like water. All right, guys. Until next time. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
Unspoiled Network podcast.